Good afternoon. Welcome everyone to our webinar on AI in the law, navigating risks, realizing opportunities. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. AI is rapidly reshaping our world, redefining how societies function, how businesses operate, and critically, how the law is understood, practiced, and applied. As AI systems gain influence in areas like legal research, employment decisions, and dispute resolution, they challenge long-held legal principles around fairness, accountability, and professional responsibility. In the legal sector, the occurrence of fictitious cases and citations have been examples that have plagued the profession in its reliance on certain AI tools. Very recently, two cases, one in California and another in Canada, are further examples of legal professionals using AI platforms to generate and draft legal pleadings and documents without due care on the accuracy of citations. And what is meant by this is basically two things. The first is the use of fictitious citations, or whether the proposition that is delineated in the papers is actually supported by a specific citation. Today, it gives me great pleasure to introduce today's panel, who are located at the intersection of law and technology to explore AI and transformation in the legal sector. First, we're joined by Professor Mpedi, who's a professor and vice chancellor at the University of Johannesburg and the co-author of the recently published monograph AI and the Law. It's a really great book. I would highly recommend everyone reading it. Second, we have Rieta, who's our wonderful director at CDH and heads up our knowledge department and deals with all things knowledge and technology, among other things. And last, Safi, who is an associate at CDH in the knowledge management department and the competition department. And given I suspect that her best friends are probably robots, she will be very well positioned. She's very well positioned to be part of this panel. Our guests will guide us through foundational insights, ethical concerns, practical applications, and the evolving skills legal professionals must now master to stay ahead in the AI era. Professor Mpedi, let me start with you. Maybe a simple question to start off is, but an important question nevertheless, how do you define AI in the legal context?
Thank you very much, Nadim. Good afternoon to you, fellow panel members, and all the participants. Let me also take this opportunity to commend CDH for organizing such a timely webinar. Well, I must put this in a particular context, ladies and gentlemen. Historically, the law has been largely reactive tool. However, in the age of artificial intelligence, in brief AI, in simple terms, AI refers to machines mimicking human intelligence through a set of algorithms. Maybe I should say complex algorithms. So these machines can learn, reason, solve complex problems. We have already seen now, ladies and gentlemen, AI has revolutionized entire industries, but what seems to have remained unexplored, in my humble opinion, is how it impacts the very foundation of justice and governance, that is the law. And for that reason, I'm extremely happy that CDH put this webinar together, and all of you, ladies and gentlemen, managed to find time to join us, and let us have this conversation.
Thank you, Professor Mpedi. So just on the back of that question and what you said, could you elaborate on current AI applications in legal systems globally, and what benefits and risks these potentially introduce or have already introduced in the sector?
Yeah, globally, we've seen a number of AI applications emerging from the general ones that people know, your ChatGPT, DeepSeek, people have been in trouble for using ChatGPT the wrong way, ChatGPT the wrong way. But there are also specialized AI applications that are being used, by law firms, government departments, in their daily duties on legal matters to help analyze large volumes of data. But we've also seen this in the criminal justice system, where this is used, to focus crime, to look at crime patterns and so on. And the numbers of these applications are increasing. So when you look at this thing, it's like fire. AI to me is like fire. You can use it to cook sumptuous meals and enjoy yourself, but if you don't use it properly, it can burn you. So there are uses and misuses. I mean, on the misuses side, we've seen a number of challenges that people sometimes don't take into account, like rhythmic bias, which, of course, this is based on the data that you use. If your data is skewed, like most of the data that is used comes from the West, you'd find that it's focused on a particular group. When you apply in a different context, then you may have those biases. Another issue is that AI hallucinates. I mean, just to give an example, I'm sure many of us will relate, with this navigating nicely. All of a sudden, you get a message, you have reached your destination, only to find that you are lost. So those are the issues. But I must add and say there are also limitations, especially in the field of law. I mean, legal issues are not always that straightforward. They are complex. That, a machine that is trained on old data may not be able to handle that. Another issue, critical thinking that you need, is not always there. And another important point is legal strategy. I mean, lawyers in the room, in this virtual room will know you need to have a strategy. You may have some answers, but you need a strategy in terms of how you're going to approach the issues. Let me pause there, Nadim.
Okay, so what you're saying, in a way, it's a bit like GPS,
Yeah.
you can use it to navigate to your destination, but you need to know where you must arrive at the end of the day.
That's right. That's right.
Okay. Safi, over to you. I mean, Prof. Mpedi has mentioned that there's certain platforms that are specifically in use already by some law firms, and we have Harvey and Lagora and potentially others. And maybe let me ask you, to what extent have AI tools already transformed daily legal practice in firms, particularly in research, contract analysis, or litigation? I think you're on mute, Safi.
Sorry, I was just making a note because I think you gave me legal research, contractual analysis, and was it litigation? So you've got to remember that. But just for everyone's benefit, AI has changed my life personally, absolutely, completely. And I think I can say the same thing for a lot of my colleagues, Nadim included. And I think that it's easy to think that AI is something that's abstract or futuristic, but in reality, and especially at a firm like CDH, where we're at the forefront, we're trialing these tools, we're piloting, we're seeing what works, we're seeing what doesn't. It's already quite deeply woven in our day-to-day life. So if you look at something like legal research, the tools that historically people would go, they would try and find a case, they would read a case, they would decide if it would apply to facts. Now we've got tools that allow us to ask questions in plain English. We get the relevant cases delivered to us and the legislation in our hands, and it's almost instantaneous. So it's not just faster, it's a lot sharper. You're not spending hours and hours wading through irrelevant results. The tool does the initial sweep of these full databases, and that means that lawyers get to spend time thinking about the results. So the 3, 4, sometimes 10 hours you would spend trying to find the cases, that is now spent on analysis and strategy, which is, I think, fantastic. And that's some of the things that the legal research tools help us to do. Then we've got contract analysis, I think you asked about, and that's quite a huge one. So especially when we're looking at high volume matters like due diligences and compliance reviews, what AI can do is that it helps us pull key clauses. It'll spot unusual items. It can flag inconsistencies. It can go through documents for relevance very quickly. It can essentially follow your prompt, and you can direct it to look for certain information that's relevant to the flag that you're trying to identify. So it isn't perfect, obviously. It's still going through a lot of documents, but it dramatically cuts the time that a lawyer needs to get at least a first review done of documents. And again, it helps focus the energy on legal judgment as opposed to going, oh, this is a duplicate email. And to be fair, I'm going to move to litigation because I mentioned duplication. And that's where e-discovery comes in. E-discovery, we know historically the tools have been able to deduplicate. It's been able to flag documents that may or may not be relevant. But now it's been supercharged. So instead of juniors poring over thousands of emails, AI will help surface the most relevant threads. It'll help pick out the right people, and it will find keywords that can easily assist when it comes to e-discovery processes. There are tools. I haven't personally used the tools myself because I'm not currently in litigation, but there are some tools that help map sentiments and patterns, which is really hard to catch manually. AI now being able to understand things like tone, and that's the generative aspect of it. And I think for me, what's the most interesting part is the border effect, is that AI is not really just slotting into the old workflows. It's forcing us to think about how we tackle these workflows. And so at CDH, and especially in knowledge management, we're asking questions like, what should lawyers be spending time on? Where can we shift junior training now that certain kinds of work are we can automate certain kinds of work with AI? And how we make sure lawyers are obviously being trained in this environment. I don't want to get ahead of myself, especially because not every firm is going to be in the same position. I think there are a lot of firms that are just starting out. There's definitely a push toward using more AI. But in our space, of course, and in the space for a lot of law firms, transformation is not quite theoretical. It's already here. And we're not talking about replacing lawyers before anyone thinks I'm suggesting that. It's really about using these tools, which are so powerful, to strip away what is repetitive and then leaving room for what I call the actual thinking and adding real value.
So AI not yet replacing the judicious element that lawyers have, but rather more creating a more effective and efficient way of working. So reducing time and allowing lawyers to free up human resources for more impactful work. So I think that's what you were saying, Safi. So Rieta, I mean, while Safi gave us quite a good explanation of some of the opportunities that AI has provided lawyers and has created in the legal space, do you have, possibly, I'll come to you for the negative, do you have any misgivings about the adoption of AI tools? And if so, how are firms addressing these concerns when adopting AI technologies? But yeah, implementing, adopting, and also in what way, what should guide that process, perhaps,
Right. So, Nadeem, before I speak about the risks, I want to say that for me, the increased use of all types of AI, including generative AI, is an inevitability. It is here, it is real. People are using it. So irrespective of what I'm about to say about the risks, that I'm not suggesting that people can avoid it or people can ignore it. We're at CDH right now actively working on 3 different Gen AI pilots, and we have 3 more artificial intelligence, machine learning priorities that we need to implement this year. So we have to use it. We have no choices. But understanding the risks doesn't mean we can avoid those risks. We just have to get our head around it, and we have to find a way to be responsible and to implement in a considered way. So of all the risks, and I think most people have heard some of the high priority risks. As a law firm, obviously confidentiality and client confidentiality is an issue. We've got that, I think, to a large degree covered because we control the parameters of the platforms that we implement and we educate. I'm not saying there's no risk, but the risk that really keeps me up at night is the hallucination risk. That's what you refer to, and I think Prof. Mpedi also referred to it. And this is not a risk. It is an inevitability It does not matter what Gen AI platform you use. It is going to hallucinate. We've tested it. It will do it over and over again. It will make mistakes, and it will make it so beautifully that you won't notice that it's made a mistake and it's given you hallucinations. So it will happen. You have to assume that it's happening, and you have to provide for that. So how do we do that? How do we get our heads around the hallucination and that it's going to happen? We approach it first and foremost from an education perspective. And yes, education about what is the legal technology, what does it mean, what does hallucination mean, but that's not good enough. We're taking people all the way back to why are they doing what they're doing? What is the purpose of our profession? We're not just doing a job as a lawyer. We are a profession. Our obligation goes beyond a task delivery. It goes beyond a deadline that is met. We're responsible, partially responsible for delivery of a social justice system, of a legal system. And we have to remember that every word that comes out of our mouths, every word that we put on paper and submit to a court, that constitutes an expression of our ethical obligation to speak truth, to follow ethical guidelines, and no word should leave your desk without you having read it, without considering it, without being sure that you know what it means. And that brings all of us, it's almost a pull back. At the same time, we're embracing this new technology, but we're pulling back into a world where every word matters. Don't rely on precedent. Don't rely on example, because you cannot trust it. You have to apply your mind. That's also your value proposition, as it turns out. Because if you're not going to apply your mind, we can do it without you. You know, if I'm just going to take the product of a machine, why do I need you? I need you because you apply your mind. So apply your mind. So education, letting lawyers remember that we're serving a purpose greater than pushing out a bunch of papers. And then linked with that, we strongly encourage lawyers to think of Gen AI platforms not as legal research tools. That is not what they are there for. They are unreliable as legal research platforms. We have legal research platforms. We have reliable sources due to LexisNexis, Sabinet, the whole lot of them. Use those. It's not what Gen AI is for. So this hallucination risk, that's what keeps me up. That's what's going to embarrass my lawyers. It's what's going to embarrass the firm if we don't get that right.
So Rita, the two things that you've mentioned, the one is the appropriate use of AI platforms. So for example, not to use it for research. That's not optimally what it's made for. And we have other more reliable platforms for that. But secondly, I mean, the same principle that we've always had, don't use templates or precedents without applying your mind to them. It's now extended, perhaps even more so, to these platforms, because they come across so convincing a lot of the time by the responses they give you. So I mean, just before I go to the next question for you, Rita, there's a question in the chat that asks, especially I think in relation to what Safi mentioned, that if AI allows lawyers to be more efficient and effective in their time, and how they make use of their time, especially to sort through large collections of data. Does this mean, or is a consequence of this, that the billable hour will be reduced for clients, because they don't need to pore over documents for the same amount of time that they ordinarily would have prior to the age of AI?
So other than the fact that I want to say that there's a reshift, a balance, that now interrogation of every word is necessary of an outcome. Whereas if you had a junior lawyer read a bunch of documents and deliver an outcome, there's a level of reliance you can place on the fact that a human mind has already looked at it, and the senior might not have to study and interrogate every word. That won't apply. So there'd be a shift in time. I'm not saying all time will be removed. The time shifting will take us a little bit of adjustment to get right. But the logic dictates that if you spend less time and you bill by the hour, you're going to charge for less time. I would hope that if there is a cost saving, that cost saving will also benefit our clients. Yes.
Thanks, Rita. So before I let you go for this part, Heta, you've highlighted some of the concerns regarding AI in the legal sector and the application and adoption of AI tools. So within, are there any lessons here for the adoption of AI in other sectors outside of the legal sector?
Yes, yes. I think that absolutely there is. So if I had to, and I jotted down some thoughts so that I don't miss something and I keep myself concise. But if I had to advise someone in a different sector, what is your journey? How do you develop your Gen AI specific journey? The starting point is don't assume AI is the answer. You have to define the problem that you're trying to solve or the opportunity that you are trying to access. And don't try and force something into the wrong spot, because you're going to be unsuccessful. But now, assuming you've done your thinking, you've thought it through, and AI is the way to go. Now, my next advice to you is be very clear in your own mind as to your risk profile, because that will influence how you then implement. So what's your risk profile? It's your data. Absolutely understand where your data sits, the data that will train this AI tool, typically a bot that is used in industry. So understand your data, understand what data you give it and who controls that data. Understand where your platform will operate. Are you subject to specific legislative or regulatory regimes? If they're cross-border transactions, that's going to impact on your deployment. Understand if this is a particularly high risk AI. High risk would have impact on people's lives. It would make decisions that has impact beyond what you can see in the immediate. But sometimes in the immediate, it has impact. It makes decisions on medical diagnosis. It can be a self-drive vehicle, whatever. They can be profound and immediate impacts. The more profound impact, of course, the higher the obligation that will rest on you. Are you clear about the transparency and the fairness requirements and the limitations to those? And where are you building in your human oversight? It's not a do you build in human oversight. It is where do you build in human oversight. You must have human oversight at testing phases, at understanding the path, and ultimately at managing it. Now you know all your risks, right? And you know what I've told you before. It will hallucinate. If you're using Gen AI, it is going to hallucinate. It is going to have bias. It is going to make mistakes. Accept all of that. And then build a solution that provides you with some safety parameters within that reality. So you have to, to my mind, start with education. The education underpins everything, and not education in a lecture way. Education in a joint study, an ongoing education way. And then I would say create a very solid governance and oversight framework. Ideally, your oversight should be multidisciplinary, teams from legal, technical, compliance, ethics, and risk. And then you should have a flexible, digestible policy for people. You cannot try to micromanage how people will use it. It evolves too fast. So high level, but with sufficient clarity that people know when there's an obligation that rests on them to apply their discretion, apply their minds. I'm not saying this because I think you need a scapegoat. People do need to understand, though, what their obligations are if you are to try and do this in a safe way. And then you can look at reducing your risks through contracting, through insurance. In my experience, the AI platforms are not that keen to provide indemnities or warranties. In fact, they happily tell you that their tool will hallucinate and will give you incorrect answers. It doesn't help you much, but you can try and see where contracting will get you. And then the last point, something that I think is sometimes overlooked, is that your corporate culture can increase or decrease your risks of deployment with AI, and in unexpected ways. So corporate cultures that incentivizes and encourages really fast-paced and quite risky decision-making and implementation is not necessarily conducive to people taking time to consider, time to test, time to make sure that it is right. If what you're trying to push is faster, 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 more, 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 you're more likely to result in some consequences that you might not have intended. Whereas if you give people the time to consider, the time to study, time to apply their minds, you're more likely to be able to avoid adverse consequences. Also, encouraging honesty. Like, honesty is the best policy. Every judgment where lawyers and some seriously big law firms have been caught short on the hallucinations, where the law firms have come clean and admitted their wrongdoing. Yes, it's enormously embarrassing, but far, far more forgiveness will be extended to the person who admits wrongdoing than the person who denies it. But if your corporate culture doesn't encourage honesty, then you're unlikely to be able to get to the bottom of what went wrong and fix it fast.
Thanks, Rita. Thanks. That's a very comprehensive response. That in itself, I mean, you could draft a policy around a lot of those considerations that you mentioned here. Prof. Mpedi, I want to hone in on some particular context. Now, in your book, you mentioned the use and the deployment of AI in numerous contexts, in healthcare, in climate change, in relation to the criminal justice system, autonomous vehicles, weapons, and so on. But the employment lawyer in me wants to ask you that in terms of the workplace, what legal challenges emerge when AI is used in recruitment, performance monitoring, workplace surveillance, all the usual processes that an employer may utilize in relation to managing or supervising or surveying their employees? What are some of those challenges, and even possibly what are some of the opportunities that AI have for employers?
Yeah. No, thank you very much. I mean, this has been referred to as algorithmic management. When we worked on that book, AI and the Law, we enjoyed it so much, Professor Morale and I, and we realized that employment law is a separate field that requires its own book. We are currently working on a book, AI and Employment Law, to be released later this year, published by Springer. So this is it's just exciting. Look, let me start with the benefits. If you use AI, to manage some of these, important tasks in an employment relationship, of course, there is enhanced efficiency that the employer will gain, and I'm sure employees will also benefit somehow. Cost reduction, which hopefully some of the benefits will be passed, to employees, real-time performance tracking, and of course, objective decision-making. But here, we're dealing with human beings, in as much as AI can help minimize challenges such as human error, bias, but there are also other challenges that emerge. It must be remembered that in employment law, it is important to be fair and objective, in your practices and whatever you're doing, whether it's recruitment, performance monitoring. So what you're doing must be fair and objective. And here with AI, if one follows it blindly, especially when one imports tools, that are developed elsewhere, that may not be appropriate for the local context, one runs a risk of, algorithmic bias we talked about earlier. We have read about stories in other countries, in the West, where, people of color were discriminated against because of, in employment, appointment processes, women, and so on. So one must be careful about that, because that is a risk, that there might be unfair discrimination. In terms of performance monitoring, as I indicated, there are benefits, to maximize processes, maximize profits, work efficiently. One can also use this, in training, ensuring that, employees are safe. But there are also risks, when these tools, especially the so-called wearables at work, is something that we wrote about in the book, the use of wearables at work, where instead of just measuring performance, but also ensuring that employees are safe when discharging their duties, if an employer goes beyond that and use that to violate the employee's rights, such as the right to privacy, right to dignity, and so on, then those are the challenges. So this requires, some balancing, from the employer, line managers, of course, and of course, proper ethical frameworks and trust. And as a result, one must be able, as an employer, to explain how one reached a particular decision, because one cannot just say, no, I used AI, that's it, leave me alone. Decisions must be explainable. So the risk of workplace surveillance is high, and there are laws in terms of when one can be surveilled and when one cannot do that. So one must be careful of those. So it's once again balancing the benefits against the risks, and also not following AI blindly. Let me pause there, Nadim.
Okay, so thank you so much. That's a very, very useful response. I think the important point that comes through what you're saying is that the human element, the element of assessment and judgment cannot be relegated to AI. That in the workplace, and even in if a particular decision is challenged, or further information is requested around why a particular decision or determination was made, that would need to be explained. And simply saying that you used the tool where you plugged in some data which spat out some information is not going to cut it. That's just not adequate. So let me with that, let me come to the point of dispute resolution.
Right.
So are there any implications of AI in relation to dispute resolution? And I know in your book, you also mentioned, you take into account the access to justice and the ways in which AI could potentially enhance access to justice. So that's something positive. So could you tell us a little bit more about that, as well as what are some of the concerns in relation to this area?
Yeah, no, thank you very much. I mean, we know how long it takes, for decisions to be made, concerning legal disputes. We know our challenges with high unemployment, poverty, and so on. So my view is that AI, if deployed correctly, it can make justice accessible, especially for the marginalized amongst us. It can help people complete forms. It can help once again with the analysis of huge data, and that hopefully lawyers will pass the benefit to the clients and so on. But then there are challenges. You need to have people who are ethical, presiding judicial officers who are also ethical. If they just rely on this and they don't take responsibility, then it's problematic. There is an exciting example in Latin America. I can't remember the country now from the top of my head, where the judge used AI to analyze large volumes of data provided as evidence. And in the judgment said clearly that I'm grateful for AI for helping me analyze this data, but the decision is mine and mine alone. And distinguishing where AI starts and ends in helping summarize the issues, and then indicating where he, has reached his judgment based and giving the reasons. So that collaboration is possible. Now, the big challenge is, like, it's nice for us to sit like this and say AI can do this and that. The question is, how many of our, with all due respect, how many of our judges are clued up when it comes to AI matters? I don't know. How many of our commissioners can really use this in a way? So we need to also empower people. And then we should not make this, should we go there to online dispute resolution using AI, as something that is for the privileged few, those who are in urban areas. What about the marginalized, people who are in deep rural areas? Because in South Africa, we've got this digital divide challenge. So it's a balancing act. I think small steps would be quite helpful. And for employers internally, I mean, AI can play an important role to see patterns. If all these cases are about a particular issue, an employer using AI can see that over the last 10 years, Theft has been a big issue. Of course, I mean, theft, you don't need to get AI, but I'm just using it wildly. But one can see that there is this pattern that is emerging, and one can bring in some corrective measures, to also make sure that not everybody is fired. People are trained accordingly. People are guided accordingly. Let me add another important element that I think we should not just assume that AI on its own is a solution. We need to train people, and I'm sure we'll talk about this, particularly our trade unionists. Our trade unionists need to really chill a little bit, because when you talk about these things, you say, guys, you are falling behind. They get so worked up. They need to empower themselves. The same applies to lawyers. A lawyer today that says AI is not for me is making a big mistake. We need to grapple with this thing. We need to understand that in practice, people don't embrace what they don't know, fear what they don't know. So we need to deal with that fear element and work with these issues, and then train ourselves so that we know, when to jump in and when to take a pause and take a deep breath. Let me stop there.
So yeah, I think it's someone in the chat said embrace but not rely. So embrace it, but not rely on it to the extent where you indicate or you justify particular determinations or decisions or conduct based on the tool that you're using. Safi, I'm going to come to you. As someone who persuaded me, especially on how significant AI can be, what kinds of data literacy or tech skills are becoming essential for today's legal professionals? You're on mute, Safi.
Sorry again. Now, I'm glad that I was a part of your AI journey, Nadeem, but I want to start with debunking a little bit of thinking that seems to go on. A lot of lawyers, a lot of people seem to think that legal tech skills are about knowing which button to press. It's about lawyers becoming part-time data analysts or becoming coders and understanding Python. It's none of that. Like, what is now really essential is judgment. And I think Greta emphasized this point earlier on. It's the ability to understand what the tool that you are using is optimized for, where that tool falls short, and how to make informed decisions around the use of those tools. So that's number one. And I'll go to number two just now, but I just want to say a little more on that. So a lot of people I've spoken to know that I'm obsessed with the VALS report, which was a benchmarking study that compares the performance of a few leading legal AI tools. So we're looking at Harvey and CoCounsel and a few others against independent lawyers completing real world tasks. So the lawyers were given about 2 weeks to complete the tasks, and the legal AI tools were given a similar amount of time, and the results were bananas. So AI consistently outperformed lawyers on tasks like document Q&A, summarization, and transcript analysis. But where it failed is when it came to redlining and deeper legal research. And in those spaces, humans were still ahead. So to me, that distinction says quite a lot. That these tools are really brilliant at breadth. They don't get tired. They don't miss things because they don't have bodies. They don't need to eat. They don't need to sleep. They just keep going, regardless of whether there's context switching or not. There's literally nothing that it can't do. Well, I mean, I exaggerate, but it can do a lot when it comes to getting into the granular detail with incredible consistency. But what they can't do is legal reasoning. So they don't quite understand nuance. They don't understand ambiguity. They don't understand strategic intent. They don't understand something like playing the man, not the ball. So while they deliver technically correct answers, they're not necessarily like answering the right question all the time, and they're not really thinking about downstream implications. So I have a litigation background. When I got a letter of demand from someone, I wasn't just thinking about responding to the letter of demand. I was thinking 10 steps down the line to how my response would look if I had to present it up in the Supreme Court of Appeal and the judge saw it. What would they think? AI is not thinking like that. That's the kind of strategy
It doesn't have human
teaching.
foresight or strategic thinking in that sense.
Not at all. And I think it was Tepiso earlier who asked about billable hours being reduced. So interesting point. I fully agree with Rita that billable hours are likely to be reduced, but I also think that billable hours will be reduced on some tasks rather than other tasks. So if all of us now have access to the same AI tool and it takes us 5 minutes to prep a discovery affidavit, what will separate the good lawyer from the average lawyer? And I genuinely believe it's the one that the lawyer that spends more time on the substantive task, thinking 10 steps, 20 steps, 30 steps ahead. And that's really where legal professionals offer the most value, because AI isn't thinking laterally. And if we rely exclusively on AI, we're looking at the homogenization of work. And so thinking about that is thinking along those lines is how our training priorities should shift. So yes, we need to be familiar with the tools, but we also need to prioritize substantive skills, skills that allow us to interrogate the output. A lawyer who can look at an AI generated clause and say, sure, it's different to what I did, but this is why the difference is better, or this is why the difference is worse, and I accept it and I reject it. And I think that, it's also about understanding, or it's about exploring data literacy, which is not about coding. It's about understanding what drives an AI tool's recommendations. What data set is it pulling from? Is there bias in that data set? How confident can we be in this result? And in what conditions should we override it? Do we have the proper verification protocols in place? That is very different to being a coder. And I think at CDH, we're quite deliberate about it. So yeah, we collaborate with AI. It's definitely not a replacement, but our training is focused on ensuring that we use it as a tool to augment. And I think that that's how we should be moving forward. Yeah.
Thanks, Safi. So talking about skills, Rita, I wanted to ask you, as someone really close to training and learning pedagogy in legal firms and beyond the legal firms as well, how should legal education and ongoing training evolve to prepare lawyers for collaboration with AI systems?
So first, the bad news. No one has the luxury to remain ignorant. Ignorance is not an excuse, and you can't choose to opt out. You can't say, well, I'm not using it. I refuse to wrap my head around it. It's unfortunately part of those ethical obligations that rest on lawyers to understand what's going on in the industry and to understand the risks and the opportunities that it presents. So sadly, all of us, whether we like it or not, we're going to have to try and understand it better. And if you don't, you're at risk of somebody else in your team relying on it, not disclosing it to you. You don't know to look for the signs, and hence you end up embarrassed and called into a judge's rooms trying to explain how your candidate attorney relied on hallucinatory cases. And that is not a random example. If anybody has read the Mabundla case, it happens. And I felt deeply sad for the poor senior lawyers in the case, but the reality is we have to. We can't say, we've practice our whole lives and this has never been a reality. I don't want to do this. You have to. So both local and international courts have recognized this ethical. It's not just me thinking it. There is an actual ethical responsibility on lawyers to understand the technology that is being used, not necessarily to become engineers and coders themselves, but certainly to interrogate what those technologies do and understand the risks and make sure that they do not misrepresent anything to a court. So how do we go about this? I don't think strict no AI policy will help. It's just not feasible, because you'll be fooling yourself. People will be using it anyway, and so you have to acknowledge that people will use it and try and navigate a safe path. An absolutely fundamentally important component of that safe path is education, and this is not a once-off. It's not you educate on people on what AI means, what the tools do, and that's it. box ticked. This is an ongoing, constant conversation because people forget. And the very nature of the generative AI tools is such that it sneaks up on you. It gives you a false sense of security because it delivers great, reliable content time after time after time, and then slam, it gives you an absolute doozy at the worst possible time when you've started trusting it. So constant conversations, constant reminders, and as I've said before, multidisciplinary. I learn more from my team than they do from me, I think, when it comes to technology. And it's because we look at things differently. And you have to have those conversations. My team now includes an engineer. And we learn from this engineer on a daily basis, and I'm hoping he learns from us as well a little bit. But the shared thinking around what goes into these platforms, what's the purpose, how to approach it safely, and conversational learning, far more than lecture style learning. So we share everything we get, every judgment internationally, every piece of regulation that comes through, we share it. People read, they can read for themselves. And then we have targeted conversations. But I fully, Prof. Mpedi, I thought you may have seen my notes somehow, because I was going to end, my final point on this section was very much what you said. Our obligation is not just to our own people. It's not just to the CDH lawyers. Our obligation is wider than that. As the lucky few who can afford to play with the technology, who can afford to interrogate it, our obligation to inform goes beyond just our reporters. And I'm at risk of now sounding the CDH horn, but we have already started doing that, developing short courses on legal technology with tertiary institutions. And it was always intended to be open to the industry as a whole, because we believe that the industry needs to understand the risks for all of us to play our part and all of us to know when there is a risk of hallucination. It's going to take a village. We are raising a child, Harvey, Legora, whatever it is, and we need to do it together, and we need to do it in a responsible way.
Reda, thanks. That's a good segue for you, Prof. Mpedi. I wanted to ask you, as someone who's positioned in academia at a university and holds a very senior position, from a leadership and policy perspective, how can educational institutions foster interdisciplinary fluency among scholars and practitioners within the legal discipline and sector?
No, thank you very much, Nadim. It's like Rieta saw my notes, because I wanted to say it takes a village. Gone are the days with this AI for IR technologies that you want to be the leader there alone. And I like what CDH is doing, and no wonder we are working together now, I'm part of your webinar, because we as a university realizes that issues of AI need to be brought to the general public. Firstly, starting with our students. So we've got a course that is called AI in the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Now, Rieta touched on this thing. When people talk about these things, they think it's about being an engineer, coding, and so on. No, just having basic understanding of what you are dealing with. What is this animal AI helps a lot. It takes away the anxiety and all the fears that people may have. So we developed that course some years ago, and it is for our students. We want law students, when they study law, that they must also understand AI. When they go out there in the labor market, they need to know what they're dealing with. So we then decided that, no, we're not going to limit this to the University of Johannesburg. That course is available free of charge. As long as you have matric, you can take that course. It takes 50 hours. I did it myself, enjoyed it. I did it one December holidays. It took me 1 week, but I couldn't stop, And basic
very productive for the holidays.
Something we take for granted. And by the way, you get a certificate, a digital certificate that you did that course. So Rieta, unlike you, I'm blowing my university's horn. We have to advertise at some point. But it's a perfect example, and we've opened it up to everyone, including students from other universities. Another important thing as a university, because we are researchers, is to break these issues down and make them understandable to a man in the street. Look, 5 years ago, I was not big on writing opinion pieces. Thought leadership was not my thing. I wanted to write solid things with long footnotes. I still do that. But I make a point when I write a chapter in a book on something relevant, I break it down in simple terms, publish it as an opinion piece so that the common man can understand what we are dealing with. So to answer you, Nadim, education, skills development, and not a hit and run, as Rieta has indicated, although I'm using my own words, hit and run, it should be a continuous thing. Companies, government departments, and all the role players must invest in training and upskilling and updating people. Investment in AI matters is not a waste. So we need to do that. Now, from a policy point of view, here is our problem as people who are in the field of law. I'm not a legal practitioner, but I'm a law academic in inverted commas, if I could put it that way. The biggest challenge that we're facing is that law, as I started at the beginning, is reactive. So to wait for Parliament to fill in a gap, it takes forever. And with all due respect, I doubt it if many of the parliamentarians understand these issues of AI and so on. So we need to plug a gap, I'm thinking, we need something over and above the law commission that would focus just on AI and the law. We need universities. I mean, at my university, I'm working hard with the Faculty of Law to set up an AI and the Law Institute that would break down these issues and put this information out there. And if they are willing partners, please join us. Let's work on this thing. Because you as lawyers, those that are lawyers, when you go to court with a legal program on AI and the law, a judge who may not be, up to date with these issues, will have to rely on legal material out there written by professors and also your understanding, because a judge cannot say to you, go home, I don't have an answer. So we need to work together so that we can progress on these issues. The Presidential Commission on the Fourth Industrial Revolution argued that laws will need to be updated. How many laws are you seeing today being updated? And I don't blame the relevant departments or parliament, but we all have a role to play to flag these issues so that laws can catch up. Otherwise, it's going to be the Wild West out there. Let me pause there.
Thanks, Professor Perry. So, I think what you're saying is that we need to centralize learning regarding AI, and in doing that, we need to collaborate with interested parties and stakeholders. It needs to be consistent and it must be accessible. And if we have those elements, then we have something good going. Someone recently mentioned, partly as a joke, that in due course in time, a course on AI may be as important as civil procedure. But let's see how that pans out. We're beginning to come to the end of our time, so I'm going to end with two questions for you, Prof. Mpedi. The second last question is, what practical mechanisms, regulatory, technical, or ethical, can be adopted to mitigate risks? I mean, we've spoken a bit about the concerns and risks, and ensure AI systems in professional, creative, and knowledge-based environments, including in the legal sector, remain transparent, equitable, and trustworthy. So that's the second one. But then the last one, which I think you can tell us a little bit about your book, some of the highlights about the book, and some of the contents, and a bit of a plug for the book, which I think is great, by the way. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, Nadim. Nadim, firstly, professional bodies should not be afraid to say, we are lawyers. Let's come together. Here's this beast. How do we start, understanding it, working with this? So starting with basic guidelines, those that are at the forefront of this, sharing their knowledge, and I sense from Rieta that CDH is not selfish, is prepared to share with everyone, because once you are on the same, wavelength, you'll be able to focus on things that matters than starting arguing about things that, one should not be arguing about. So those guidelines, I'll give an example. When ChatGPT hit the scene, A lot of people are saying, no, ban it, ban it. At the University of Johannesburg, we said we want to understand it. We came up with guidelines for researchers, for students, and for teachers on how they can use it ethically, the do's and don'ts, uses and misuses, and that is how people learn. At a policy level, I think we need the so-called regulatory sandboxes where people can experiment with this in a safe environment. I'm aware of time. Let me switch over to the book. Thank you so much for advertising this book. This book is a perfect example of collaboration. I worked with Professor Marwala, who's well known. He's a leader and engineer in AI. In our many tea discussions, I realized that he may know AI, but he doesn't understand the law. So I always argued that, yeah, AI is good, but the law, there is this, there is that. And then we decided to write this thing. So collaboration is key to bring all sorts of ideas, and from different perspectives. So the book is written in a simple, accessible manner, deliberately, so that people can come to grips with the basics of this. And as I indicated, we're working on AI and employment law. Hopefully, you'll enjoy it. And we cover all sorts of topics. AI is everywhere, from employment law to autonomous weapons, autonomous vehicles. You name it. Health, social security. So colleagues, please make a point that you learn a thing or two, because AI is here and is evolving at a fast pace. Don't be left behind. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Prof. Mpedi. Yeah, that just leaves me to say thank you to our panelists. Thank you, Prof. Mpedi. Thank you so much for making time and joining us. Thank you, Rieta. Thank you, Safi. And I think what we gathered out of all of this is that AI is not just a technical shift. It's a legal, ethical, and societal turning point. And today's insights, I think, reveal how deeply it's reshaping legal practice, rights, responsibilities, how we do our work, how we think of our future as lawyers. And yeah, it's a continuous dialogue, and it will require continuous collaboration in a space that's consistently evolving. Thank you, everyone. Hope you have a good afternoon. Bye.